Thank you very much for joining us tonight for celebrating 50 years of the Carpet People. And we're honoured to have Colin Smythe here with us today. I'm sure you're excited as I am. This event, as I said, is our first hybrid event. I'm just going to say the microphone is for the people on Zoom. So if you're wondering why the microphone isn't working, that's why in the room that is. So it'll last roughly an hour. We'll have half an hour hearing all of Colin's tales about Terry Pratchett, and my colleagues Claire and Christopher, who will introduce themselves in a moment, will be asking him a few questions. And there will be time at the end, roughly 20 minutes, half an hour for your questions. And that also includes people online, and I will ask those questions on your behalf. So if you want to add anything in the chat, I will ask it at the end. So without further ado, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Thanks very much, and welcome to Senate House Library, University of London, and particularly to Colin Smythe. We're here to celebrate 50 years since the publication of The Carpet People, but we're also here because we are very proud and honoured to have the Colin Smythe Terry Pratchett archive, and Colin has brought some really stunning items here to share with us this evening, and we also have some items at the back on display. And it is this is a moment where we can look back to 1971 and the publication of that novel, that piece of fiction. But it's also a moment where we can look forward to what we can do in the future for the archive, and to make sure that it is shared with all Pratchett readers, fans, and enthusiasts, 25 of whom are here with us tonight, but many more online. My name is Claire Lees, and I'm the director of the Institute of English Studies, and we work very closely, obviously, with Senate House Library, but my particular distinction or reason for being here tonight is that Colin Smythe is a senior research fellow in the Institute. And we're very honoured that he is a fellow in the Institute. And it's very nice, therefore, to be sitting next to one of the more recent members of the Institute, Dr. Christopher Ogre, who is a lecturer in digital approaches to literature. He's the future, okay? So he's going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm pretty much the kind of past in many ways, but also the kind of director of the centre. So without further ado, Colin, I thought we might start, as Becca's already said, I thought we might start by ascertaining why the 15th of November 1971 and why Monday the 15th of November 1971 is so important, and what it might have to do with the publication of The Carpet People.
Well, today is Monday the 15th of November. Monday the 15th of November in 1971 was the night of our launch party at Heels, which is just over there, as it were, two pretty bald head thing. And that was the publicity leaflet, which was held inside it, press releases, and a menu for the delicious foods that were served up by the chef at Heels. Sadly, the only recorded copy of it I lost. It's been a permanent or continuing regret of mine, except to remember that there were liqueur drinks. One of them was essence of underlay. and it held a large quantity of cherry brandy. I can't know what else we have. Alas, things which you could eat, made from grown pipers and other things. The next day was publication day. I had in my website, I had today has been publication day, and in Terry Pratchett, his world, you'll see that tomorrow is publication day. So I have slightly worried Rob Wilkins ringing me this morning saying, which is it? And I was able to work out that tonight was pre-publication drink party, not the publication. So the real date was the 16th anyway.
So presumably you did have copies of it then at the launch, though, right?
Sorry.
Presumably you had copies of the book at the launch.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes,
it was just the official publication. Was the date.
The signed copies, the nice signed and hand-coloured copies, which Terry did. The ones that we did, Bandit and me, which are here, I should read them quickly. Colin Smythe, may his book make lots of money. Best wishes, Terry, September 16, 1971. And the other is Peter Vander with many thanks and best wishes, Terry Pratchett, 2nd of October 71. So we had copies available for quite some time before publication, but we were tied to the British Wool Marketing Board and Heels, who wanted it for a particular date. This was today was going to be the first day of the Christmas sale or Christmas whatever, which was being done at Heels, and so if you want. So
the fact that you had copies in early October delights people like me, because we are book historians, are interested in the history of publishing, in the history of books, as well as the economy of books and whether or not they sold well. Presumably the Wool was the Wool Marketing Board with the trademark on that. Presumably they funded the.
I don't doubt it.
It's all a blur because of that cocktail, right? I assume.
I mean, we were fortunate because when we got copies, we discovered that one picture of the Pineapple, which that was original, had been printed upside down. And they had to, I mean, it was perfectly good, okay in proofs. And then we opened it up and suddenly saw, and so all of them went back. Every single one of them. I mean, even as a bibliographer, I might sort of kept one back just to prove that we had.
Absolutely. Did you keep one back? You didn't.
No, I just, you know.
The power of negative evidence. This is a story we need to capture, and that reminds me, of course, that this event is being recorded, so it will be available online. So you can. We've now got proof of that story for the record and for the future. Now, you said there were how many copies were hand illustrated available on the 15th?
Well, none of the people who came to the launch brought their hand illustrated copy. We kept at home, I expect. You kept your.
University.
This is here now. Thank God that we may spot run, give one back to you, and one of the two that I still have.
So I think we have there is one hand copied right at the back of the room. So in the small case, so do have a look, everybody. And it's great. And thank you so much for having that one copy.
The two the rooms were displayed with covered with illustrations that Terry had drawn. We all had small identity cards, which were essentially that style, but small, just like that. For all members of the company. Whereas this one, for those who have been in Salisbury, are familiar with it. It's really rather nice, shall we say.
Hiya. there'll be an opportunity afterwards as well to come and have a look at those.
Yeah.
So there's lots of photos being taken at the moment. So you had small cards, badges made for the launch, for the pre-launch party, right? So this was a marketing coup in many ways. So you got it in the furniture shop down the road on Tottenham Court Road because of the carpet in the title and because of the carpet people. And then you launched it with this, branded it in a sense with your little badges. That's brilliant. I think that's great.
All original Pratchett.
All original Pratchetts. And in the order, for those who are on the Zoom webinar, it might be worth knowing that there are many of the members of the physical audience in person wearing their 50 years of the carpet people badges. So there's a nice echo of that first launch event here tonight. So we thank you for that. I wanted to steal one, but I don't think there are that many to be had. No, I'm being told very firmly.
There was 12.
There was 12. There were 12 badges. What else do you remember from that night? Is it buried in the cocktails?
I think to a certain extent you did the usual sort of talking to newspaper reporters and sort of.
How did the sales go at first?
Average for that sort of book.
Right.
I mean, we're talking then that
Right.
sort of book might sell 1,500, 2,000 copies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. I printed 3,000. And they sold very slowly at one time. So I partially remanded some to Australia. I don't know where they went to. I've never heard of anyone is seeing a copy in an Australian bookshop or an Australian owner, but they must exist.
That's a research project for somebody in Essex in any case. But let's go back from the 15th of November, the pre-launch, pre-publication launch party, and to why you decided you wanted to publish this in the first place. Do tell us that story.
Well, Terry
and the prehistory of the book.
Terry had been sent by his editor to interview my colleague Peter Bander about a book he had edited called Looking Forward to the 70s on the future of education in the 70s, where we got the chairman of all the Royal Commissions to write for us. A good book. And the editor of Buxbury Press recognized it. He sent Terry along to do an interview. So we maintained I think appeared in Buxbury Press on just showing off, I think, by saying that it appeared on the 10th of May, 1868. He turned up, we became friends, and one day he came along with the bag, and in it was the manuscript of copy, with which he gave to Peter, who then hurriedly handed it over to me. And I said, this has been written by somebody who was 17. You can't imagine what excitement it was to be able to read this and and say, what's he going to do in the future? He's good enough like this at 17. Or although it took a few years to get out because we wanted to get illustrations from him, it took time. And he was working at the same time, and also working at the Western Daily Press. So I determined that I was going to keep him in my fold, as it were, as a publisher, as long as I could. For total of 5 books. We succeeded. And then Terry and I decided that I was a little publisher. I still am a little publisher. literary publisher. And he deserved better. And Galax was the obvious place for him to go, even though they have never published any fantasy. And we came to an agreement, ultimately, which I became his agent instead of the co-publisher. Which Terry said, I want you to be my agent because you are the person in London whom I distrust least. So thereon, I was able to get, we started off with £3,000 a book and ended up with very six-figure sums as a success grew. And he fulfilled the role, the promise of his youth. And at the time, it was very, well, it was normal standard procedure for publishers to look after individuals who were going to become, who they thought were going to become bestsellers. And even if they sold poorly to start with, that didn't matter. They could see that there was a future. And I certainly saw the future in Terry Pratchett. So, Color Magic and Light Fantastic. And this, if you can see it, which is Bernard Pearson's three-dimensional creation of the book, which had produced or had produced 3 copies, one for Terry, one for myself, how could I not, and one for him, which he kept, which is not in his possession at the moment. I do not know who, as it were, bribed him sufficiently to part with it. But it must have been a pretty good price, I'm sure. I treasure it.
Oh, thank you so much for bringing it in for us. That's really
a superb piece of carving that Bernard did. So, yes.
So as a reader, a publisher, and then an agent, you have demonstrated excellent instincts all the way along the line, a real nose for success. And I'm wondering what it was in the late 60s, early 70s. If there's a particular memory you have that made you think, oh, I want this really is an author to stay with. I mean, you've talked about the age and the potential, but there's something about opening the carpet, people, isn't there? And you just kind of know there's.
Well, I mean, it was then. It was right from the beginning. Yeah. I was not going to let. I hoped I was going to be able to pay Terry enough for his new greenhouses, which for long enough that one could deal with it. Come to an arrangement.
That's great. I mean, I'm saying this in part because so many writers, contemporary writers now, don't have that relationship with their agent publisher that is long lasting and throughout their career.
Not many publishers become agents.
Yeah, but also publishers or agents don't necessarily stay with their writers.
Terry was tremendously loyal.
Yeah.
And had not the dreadful mistakes that Galax had done with the 2 books selling in Australia, or not selling in Australia because there weren't any copies to sell or sign, we would have stayed there very much longer. Right. There was always a tradition that Corgi and Transworld, if they got hold of the paperback, inevitably the hardcover books would go to them too. Right. And people were very surprised that Terry stayed with Galax. And it was only when in the time run at volumes 19 and 20, when in order to ensure that the copyright law was in Australia was kept to, which meant that they had to produce 50, I think it was 50 copies of any non-Australian published book published in Australia within 30 days of it being published in anywhere else in the world. That they thought they'd be clever, and they sent 50 copies. They flew them over to Canberra, where they were snapped up in a matter of about a few days. And Terry was arriving in Australia to sign thousands of copies within a fortnight. And so he arrived, and there were no books anywhere. And having got on the phone to Gollancz, there was a plane load of them being sent over very rapidly. But Terry was not a happy bunny on that. And he said, "We're leaving Gollancz." And Gollancz said, "Oh, no, please. We've got our news to sell us a new distributor who promised he's going to do marvelous things for Terry." Great person. So Terry next year was going out for another signing, and lo and behold, exactly the same thing happened. And again, the plane load of books were flown over while the main consignment were going on high seas somewhere. Off East Africa. So at that stage, Terry said, "There was no doubt about it, we're moving." And I said, "Okay, I will inform Gollancz," which I did. I didn't. I mean, I did it by first saying, "Can I come and talk?" And she obviously, Jane Blackstock was her name, knew that I was coming for a specific reason. And so she pressed me, and I had to tell her. And I then had a managing director sobbing down the phone. One of the most uncomfortable position that I'd been in.
Well, I was going to say that, of course, Gollancz is another of the great London publishers, but I don't think I'll say that in this context.
Well, at that time, the Gollancz, Victor had gone, Lydia had gone.
Of course.
It had passed into the ownership of Castle, and and then not at that time into around Castle's time.
I think we're deep in the history of publishing here, and I think it's perhaps a moment where I turn now to the potential for the future of the archive. And so I'm looking at my colleague Christopher Oger, who is going to take over a few questions.
Sure.
I think there's an obvious one, but I think I'll let you pick that one up, and we'll take it from there, because one of the things that we very much want to do is to make sure that this wonderful archive is maintained, sustained, connected with the archives in Liverpool and in Trinity College Dublin, and as made as accessible to as wide a public as possible. And this event is one of many ways that we're trying to do that. So Christopher, share some thoughts with us.
I just wonder if we could return to the carpet people for a moment, though. You said that it sold average for a book of that sort. What was the marketing of it in particular? Was it marketed as fantasy at the time, and was there a large market as there is now for that sort of thing?
No, it was children's fiction was very much treated as second class.
Yeah.
And fantasy was worse treated. If you liked it, you published it. And at the time, we were very fortunate that every county had its own, every county library had its own purchasing department. And each county would more or less buy 6 to 20 copies of every book that was being published. The number of books being published at that time was only about 18,000 books a year in Britain. And that it compares with 180 to 200,000 now. And where there was, and therefore there was a lot more money, well, there were also a lot more rather richer libraries too, that they could buy, they could put out basically a standing order that any book, adult, non-fiction, fiction, would sell in minimal to 1,500 to 2,000 copies. That's how, as a young publisher, we were able to sort of survive. We knew how many were going to be published, or rather sold, and you know, we made sufficient profit.
We will get to the future, but one more past
No,
question.
it's fine. Good.
When we pick up our copy of the 50th anniversary, we learn that there are two authors, a young Terry Pratchett and an older Terry Pratchett, but surely there's more to that story. Can you tell us why he revised it? And
well, I wanted to republish it, and he didn't want to. He didn't want me to. Simple as that. He said it's not good enough to be published under the present. I will rewrite it.
So there was a third person.
But that was just, I triggered it basically. He always felt embarrassed by it, that it was too juvenile. Why shouldn't it be? Every right to be. He was looking at it from 20 years difference. So that's how that started.
And you've said that the 1971 edition is out of print and hasn't been reprinted.
Not yet.
And you'd like to see it.
I would like to see it, and I would hope. I would hope that Rob Wilkins and his wisdom will ensure that an edition will appear. We must feel sorry for the poor man at the moment, who's somewhere up in Scotland, in Stirling, I think, he's filming in the middle of the night, cold weather, good omens too. Yes, so it's up to him. What me now? He's the boss.
Well, one thing we could do, perhaps, is to digitize it and make it available.
Yes, I could. Such an activity is not within my power.
Right.
Well, might agree, but I think he'd rather keep it for the time when the extra special edition with illustrations by a certain well-known personality might appear.
Are there drafts in the archive, in any of the archives? Or I'm just thinking about that preface to the revised edition. I just wondered whether
he might have had it. I mean, I don't think, I can't remember because everything was typed in. There was nothing.
I know.
You know? And while Terry was a brilliant editor, there was one piece in Strata, this is a sidetrack, I'm afraid, where there was a scene change that I thought was rather abrupt. I wanted to ask Terry to write me a couple of sentences to clear it. And he sat down at the typewriter and wrote a page and a half, just like that. Boom. And it molded so seamlessly into the book. I still can't find where it was, but I lost it at the paper which it tracked. Well, no, actually, it's not. That's not quite true. It's the typescript of that is in McMaster University in the Milton Memorial Library. So
Leslie, did you want to come
Yeah, I
in?
want to say something. That Colin Smythe was more of an encyclopedia to Terry, Latin words or German. He would bring in any time when he would help him.
his books are white.
Latin or
Yes. Well, that happened. Terry used to ring up and say, "How I'm stuck. I'm not sure where I'm going to go. Have you any suggestions?" And you talk over things and say, "Yeah, I've got enough. Bye." And then I know where I'm going. And when the book came out, there was absolutely nothing like our conversation in the book at all. He'd gone on obviously half a dozen different lines of thought and brought out, which in most cases I would only admire. There's only one occasion where I regret didn't take my advice, and that was in snuff, because I thought that Stratford should, the hoofbeats that should have been should not be weakened in death, coming out of it, and that actually Stratford had died.
So that I was going to say that demonstrates Christopher's point about how there's a writer and an editor and the earlier writer as well, enabling the whole process.
But this was, you know, the height of stuff was hard.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But even so, it's that intangible relationship between the public, the agent, the publisher, and the writer, particularly over time, that enables the work to be produced. And quite often, the writer gets the credit, but what we want to do tonight is also honour and celebrate Colin as well.
I mean, never really any occasions. I mean, all I could say to Terry once I'd read the book, I mean, I read it about 4 times before publication. I read it to narrative lust to start with. Then I had to read it again, and then I started actually being slightly critical about things. And they reached the question of dotting I's and crossing T's. But if you there were these occasional times where you found something which you felt would be better, and never once did I ever succeed in getting to accept any of my suggestions at all. So, no, it completely nullifies yours.
Okay, my theory was completely wrong. Sorry, I interrupted you, Chris.
No, that's fine. It's fascinating. There are these unknown transmissions between collaborators and authors, and ultimately, what a lot of us care about are the author's actions.
All I have to do is just basically to say, you know, this is such an amazingly well-crafted work.
Yeah.
This was the thing that's always stood out amongst his books, how well he had written. And not the fact that it was a lovely, good story, but it was the first thing I would say about its crafting.
Yeah.
I think they did
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mentioned Mark Twain earlier. I worked on Mark Twain before I came here, and I saw a similar kind of craft in place, mixed with tremendous attention to storytelling, but never a word wasted. Both of these writers. Did Terry Pratchett read Mark Twain by any chance?
I'm sure I must have.
That's
Somebody actually should do a catalogue of Terry's library.
Yes.
to his books.
Yeah.
What happened to his books?
Well, it's still in the chapel.
Yeah, I can confirm they're still in the chapel.
They're still
They
there.
were there when I was there last.
The question of, you know, as he evolved, he read less and less fiction because you had the fear that people were going to say, send him suggestion, and if he was writing something which was vaguely familiar, he would not. They'd accuse him. There was a large, I mean, apart from the J.K. Rowling and the bus and the caterpillar. Terry had the situation with the last continent, where this woman wrote to him and said, I see you have written, you have taken my advice. Terry thought, oh shit, have I thought of taking somebody? And anyway, so as it happened, having found her letter, readers don't realize how long it takes for books to go through the publishing process. And on this occasion, this woman had, with not, I mean, shall we say, this fan, maybe it's a better way of putting it, had written on the day that Terry had sent the completed typescript of the last continent to his publisher. So there was absolutely no possibility at all that she was perhaps wanting to claim credit. And so Terry stopped reading fiction completely. And devoted his time to research, you know, on various poisons or feeding Nelson's Navy or things like this.
He was also very interested in technology.
Okay.
Right? I have to ask, among the many items that the Colin Smythe Terry Pratchett collection has, which of the items do you think are the most interesting? Have research value that we could consult? I'm thinking the computer games, but I wonder what you think.
I never knew how much Terry played computer games until he died. I mean, my job was as agent. My agent job didn't include his sort of murderous games with his daughter. Kill your partner, and that way you're short of them.
Any other items then?
No, I just don't know. We should have to. I mean, Rob was seeing a lot of it. Since Terry stolen from me, because he worked on this line from 98 to 99.
I think we are coming to the close of the kind of conversation across the three of us now, and we'd like to open it up for questions. And maybe we'll be able to fish for some research questions and future ideas. And there's a million hands immediately go up. I'm going to give the first one to Karen Attal, which might be a little bit biased, but she was waving very, and she's, I fear there's very few people's names that I know in this audience, but I do know Karen because she's a librarian here. So, but Karen, please start. And then I think there was a couple of other questions. So I'll
Thank you very much, Claire. It's a comment and a question. The comment is, you didn't lose the menu from that day. You very generously gave it to us. Our catalogue, there is actually an entry for the carpet people at Heels.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That is a tremendous relief.
Yes.
And it's not essence of underlay.
I can't remember that, but I remember something. It has some names that suggest snails, I think.
Yes, I think that, and real Rome piper maybe or something.
Yes, that sounds.
Well, that's a wonderful way to
Because
start.
I remember that I put down, as one does, put in the correct place. And when I next looked, it wasn't there.
Okay, well, it's in archive
It's-
box 9.
We know where it is. That's a brilliant. I'm so glad that you.
Please send me one copy as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I will.
I think it was a question.
I'll put a note down to it, but there was a question as well,
Oh, okay.
actually, which was, you've said about how he didn't want to read fiction afterwards to be influenced, but I was wondering at the time of the Carpet People, to what extent he might have been influenced by other stories of tiny people traveling a short distance that to them was a major pilgrimage, things like Mary Norton's Borrowers.
Yeah, yes,
Yes.
of course, yes.
Yeah.
And if you read through the last 4 volumes, the children's books, the story from Luxury Press, quite a large number of those have a sort of people do.
Mm.
Yes, it's fascinating.
And was enormously popular at that time as
Yeah.
well, the Borrowers. So that's
Yes, I mean,
good point.
the gnomes, all of them were he had sort of 3 or 4 different versions.
So there was a
They
question.
added its dimension.
Okay, so menus and the Borrowers. Thank you. And question at the front here.
Hi, I'm Mark Burrows. I wrote the biography of the magic of Terry Pratchett. We've never met before, but we have spoken a lot. I did a lot of the research for that book here, and I think without the archive, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as a piece of work. One of the things I've always wanted to know, in one of the numerous essays you've written about your time meeting Terry and publishing the Carpet People over the years, you said that after you agreed to publish it, that was fabulously well timed, wasn't it? It was that Terry had said when you agreed to publish it that he then read back through his manuscript and decided he needed to revise it again before it was published. The version that he gave to you was the version he wrote as a teenager. He was now in his sort of early 20s.
It did get revised, yes.
Can you remember how different? So I've always thought Carpet People has 3 authors.
I remember that, and basically I remember it because I wrote it in an email or in a letter, I think, which I typed. And therefore, the fact is there, remembered for me, but I cannot remember.
I always thought it was really fascinating that he also said that at one point he considered changing the concept entirely and making it a cartoon strip.
Yes.
Yeah. Hence the drawings as well.
But that was more for, if I remember right, it was more for a second volume. No, correction. Yes, the idea was that it might be something that you could sell on the newspaper.
Could we suggest that to Rob? But they do the Carpet People as a graphic novel and put it out.
Interesting.
No.
Okay,
It's
so
neither one thing nor the other.
it's both.
Yeah.
Rather, I think is the answer. Another question here.
Hi, I'm Elke Moritz. I'm from Germany, and I've been a fan since 1996 or something. First book I read was Pyramids. So I find it fascinating the sales figures, how they develop. Especially, I would be interested in the sales figures on the different editions of Carpet People, because there was this re-release with the reprinted colorizations, and then we have the latest edition that has the new audiobook version of the actor who also played in Good Omens. So the question is, does this have any effect on the sales figures?
I think that it comes to mind. We used to in Britain have an arrangement called Netbook And by that book agreement, every book was given a recommended retail price by the publisher. And that was the price the book was sold at in every bookshop in Britain. And it was pulled down by the couple of bookseller and to everybody price whatever they did. But while this, I'm sure, damaged sales of a great many authors, I do remember that between one book and the next, for Terry, it was a good thing. Sort of 30,000 for one book, the next one he was over 80,000. So for some people, good sellers, who were really good sellers, booksellers were able to market them in ways that enabled them to make a profit and make a better profit. But to me, the individual concerned whose name, due to senility, has left me, but Dylan, who owned Dylan at the time, I would have consigned him to the innermost circle of hell. I loathe the idea, the very concept of the breach of the network agreement. I thought it was a necessary thing, a fair thing.
I understand in your question, there's a research question there about the different economies of the various editions. It would be a real challenge to recover all that data, but it would be very, very interesting.
My difficulty, it could have done, you know, it could have been, it can still be done with a number of novels. But when Gollancz moved to Castle, or was it Orion, they stopped sending us the sales figures. They only sold us how much money, they told us how much money we were using. So we I can tell you exactly, for example, how Colour of Magic went off. I mean, 18,000 first year, 25,000 second year, etc. Until now, what, nearly 2 million. And how they, because Corgi kept immaculate records. Now, the Gollancz ones still exist, but basically they're all boxed up in some place in Liverpool. I never saw them. They say, oh, well, you got, you know, that book is sold £5,000, £250 this last half year. Never knew how many that represented, how many copies.
Thank you. There's a question. Do you have a question?
I'm Lizzie Conter. And I mean, I love the themes that run through the different Terry Pratchett novels. And I often wonder what was the thing that was particularly striking Terry to go from maybe a witch's novel, which I often see as being wonderful adaptations or rethinking of Shakespeare plays, to the moist, fun, lip-fic ones, which to me probably are my favourites, and they seem to be very, very centred as wonderful versions of reality. And then one, depending on who I'm talking to, Making Money is one of my favourites, which will make my colleagues chuckle because I'm the director of finance and planning. And having grown up among academia, anything involving the unseen university really strikes at home as well. And then also I particularly love Sam Vines, where I actually seem to switch between the two, whether you've got the wonderful Night Watch that seems to be that great evocation of a painting, but also what's going on with, you know, later ones where you think there really is that very strong political sense coming through, Snuff in particular. And I was wondering, you know, any insights you have on how those sort of themes developed. I think that'd be quite an interesting research project. Right? Takes us back.
That was his idea. You could never suggest any idea for a book to him. Like the woman who thought she was going to be telling him the right idea about that.
And was he running different books at the same time, or were there linkages or something happening in his life that were making
A lot of novels have, there are bits of novels. I mean, there are many novels he was writing on, or writing bits for, that were while he was finishing off writing another.
Really has that sense of multi-plot
Yeah.
across distributed. I mean, there's a kind of technical area there. Becky, you have your hand up because you want to voice some Zoom questions.
I do, yes, please.
So let's bring them in at long last.
One of which I think we've already said and gone over, but I'm going to say it again anyway, just for to add the voice. Will we ever get a reprint of the original story rather than the revised edition that Terry corrected for mass release? So worth saying that again, but I think you've already answered that. But the follow-up question.
It is to be hoped.
Yeah.
I believe it will happen.
And it could be digital.
Yeah. There's 3 answers there.
We're working.
I suspect that the digitization of it is less likely than the republication.
4 answers.
And the follow-up question from Jason as well is, why did it take 7 years from Terry writing the book to it getting published?
Yeah, that's a good question.
This is the company. The revision that he did on it. B, the drawing pictures, which at that time he wrote in the evenings in the winter, and during the day he was out with the goats and his garden. So there were periods of a year where he didn't do any writing. And so this delayed things. Possibly I don't know whether this came into it, as I wasn't moving as fast as I should have. I don't know, I can't remember. I feel guilty generally with publishing Terry, because there were occasions when I wasn't being as efficient. I couldn't get I couldn't find an American publisher. I was trying to get Dark Side of the Sun. I mean, The Color of Magic took a long time to get the American publishers, St. Martin's Press, to take, because it was a collection of four short stories. It was a collection of 4 short stories. The contract says it was going to be a collection of four short stories. And I believe that it could be published as a collection of 4 short stories. And it took St. Martin's something like 3 years to decide that they could go with that. And that was one of the occasions when I can actually say that I was guiltless. I couldn't get St. Martin's to publish, and and they then decided it was good enough for them to decide to print it in America, because that way they avoided the US Copyright Act, which involves you not, at that time was still, I think, that you couldn't print more than 2,000 books or import more than 2,000 books, an English edition, into America without somebody snapping the copyright, as happened with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, and there being 2 paperback editions, one which is saying this is the one which pays Tolkien money, don't buy the other one. They were rivals in the early 70s.
Jason says, thank you, great answer. And there's just a comment from David who said he's got a sculpted version of the book that he got from Bernard. If that makes sense to anyone in the audience, I'm sure it makes more sense.
Yes, it's the other one.
It's this.
Yeah.
this one, so he's got whoever.
Ducky man.
There's a question at the back and then there's another question over here. Is there any other questions, Becky, on Zoom?
Not at the moment.
Well, let's take, I'm conscious that we're coming to close. So I'll take the question at the back and then I'll come back to you if that's okay. So we can hear another voice. So just 2 more questions.
Andrew Tucker. Is the archive going to grow?
Is the archive?
Is there more to come to be put in the archive? Is there stuff out there that could be found and added?
Well, there's certain, I mean, there might have been a proof of the American edition of Color Magic that's been snaffled by a certain Dr. Auctioneer. Which I hadn't even known existed until this year. But it stands to reason because that's what Americans do. They do send them out to, and as they were printing the Garden of Magic for me as well, which is why I managed 506 copies of that because Library Market was going through the store at the time. Yeah, I'm not sure that's completely answered the question.
Speaking as a kind of book historian, researcher, there's always more to be added into archives. There's always more to be found in archives.
I think I have got, from the point of view of archive material, I mean, when it comes to books, certainly, I think we've gone, I have collected well over 95% of the publications. In variations and reprints and editions, registers, etc. As for the future, I mean, I've been, Muggins has been doing it for 30 years. I think it can go on as long as I'm not boxed. But after, I mean, I don't know. I'm the one who nags the publishers to deliver their copies that are missing from so-and-so. I'm waiting for editions for certain things from Lapin from France, which should have been sent months ago. So they actually have the rights to it.
Okay.
You know, after that, is any Muggins going to take that up?
I have a feeling they will. One final question, keep it short if you can.
Yeah, I wanted to know, we have these beautiful illustrations here from Carpet People. Did Terry make illustrations for other of his works, or is Carpet People unique in that it is the only one that has illustrations?
Well, the jacket of Dark Side of the Sun was done. That's the only other one.
Okay. And how many of these big prints exist?
And so we should now all have a look at these 2 prints again, I think, or these 2 images. They're not prints, but this is
Life of the Long Run.
And with that, it is 7 o'clock, and we have exhausted our hour, but probably exhausted you as well. It's quite intense questions. I want to draw this part of the event to a close, and to thank all of those who have joined us online, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope we can do more, and to thank also all of those who are with us here today in person, and Christopher for joining us in this great event. I want to thank Karen for reminding us that we do have a menu for the 50th.
Not a reminder, certainly for me.
Yeah.
The information.
They are true librarian, but most particularly Colin for coming along tonight and for sharing so much with us. That was a real privilege and a great honour. So thank you so much. Only 50 years.